Week before Christmas, my mother-in-law called my husband to tell him she'd invited his entire extended family to our house for the holiday. Not asked, not suggested, told. I found out the way I found out about most things in our marriage, not from my husband, but after the fact. When it was already too late to say no without being the villain, he came into the kitchen while I was making dinner, leaned against the counter with that look on his face. The one where he already knows I'm not going to like what he's about to say. And he said, "So my mom kind of told everyone Christmas is at our place this year." I turned the burner down. How many people? It's just family. How many, Caleb? He looked at the ceiling. Maybe like 18, 20, it depends on if Uncle Gerald drives up from Roanoke. I put the spoon down on the counter. Not slammed it, put it down. Because I was still trying to be reasonable. She invited 20 people to our house for Christmas without asking me. She didn't think it would be a big deal. There it was. The sentence I had heard so many times in 3 years of marriage that I could hear it in my sleep. She didn't think it would be a big deal. My mother-in-law had an extraordinary talent for doing whatever she wanted and then retroactively deciding it wasn't a big deal. And my husband, sweet, conflict-avoiding, perpetually in the middle Caleb, had an equally extraordinary talent for agreeing with her. I want to be fair here. Caleb is not a bad person. He's genuinely kind. He would give you his last $20. He remembers your coffee order. He shows up when you need help moving furniture. But somewhere along the way, his mother had trained him to believe that keeping the peace was the same thing as doing the right thing. Those are not the same thing. I know that now in a way I didn't fully understand when we got married. His mother. I'll call her my mother-in-law because I can't bring myself to use the name she's always wanted me to call her, which is Mom, which has lived 40 minutes from us since Caleb and I bought our house 2 years ago. We bought the house because we wanted space, our own space. A guest room, yes, but our guest room, a kitchen that was ours, a living room where I could leave a book face down on the couch without someone rearranging it. She had other ideas about what nearby meant. The first year, she came over at least once a week, not invited. She'd text Caleb when she was already in the car. "Heading your way, need anything from Trader Joe's?" As if the Trader Joe's offer made it an invitation, as if I should feel grateful for the ambush. Caleb always said yes. Of course she could come. She was his mom. She'd had a hard time since his dad passed. I understood that. I gave her grace. I would not have given anyone else because I knew she was grieving, because I knew Caleb needed me to. But grief doesn't give you the right to treat your daughter-in-law's home like a hotel lobby. She went through my refrigerator the first time she visited. Not looking for something specific, just opened it and stood there examining the contents like she was doing an inspection. She mentioned we didn't have enough protein. She moved the leftovers I'd stacked to make room for the creamer she'd brought, without asking where I wanted it. She asked while looking at a photo I had on the refrigerator door. A picture from my best friend's bachelorette trip, me and 4 other women, sunburned and laughing in Savannah. She asked who those people were and whether we still hung out with that crowd. I smiled and said yes and went back to the living room and sat down and breathed. I got good at breathing. The second year, things escalated in that slow way that feels manageable until you look back and realize you've been boiling for 18 months. She started expecting to be included in things. If Caleb mentioned we were going to a concert, she'd ask why she hadn't been invited. If I threw a dinner party for my friends from work, she'd ask Caleb later if she should have come. She started showing up on Saturday mornings. Not every Saturday, but enough that I stopped making plans for Saturday mornings because I never knew. Caleb kept saying it wasn't a big deal. I kept breathing. The Christmas invitation was not the first time she'd done something like this. The previous Easter, she'd told his cousins they were welcome to stop by any time during the day on Easter Sunday without mentioning it to me. 4 of them showed up at 2 in the afternoon while I was still in my pajamas making deviled eggs. And I had to smile and offer drinks to people who didn't know they were ambushing me, and I didn't know I was being ambushed. But 20 people for Christmas was different. We had a 2-bedroom house. Our dining table seated 6 if you didn't mind being close. We had 1 oven, 1 refrigerator, And I'd already made plans. Real plans with my own parents, who lived 4 hours away and had not seen me since Thanksgiving, and who I had told weeks ago that Christmas this year was going to be quiet and at our place and just us. Just us. I had already started buying things. I'd gotten a standing rib roast from the butcher, the good one, the kind that costs enough that I'd thought about it before committing. I had a specific grocery list. I had called my mom and told her about the menu, and she'd laughed and said she'd bring the pie because I always burned the crust, which is true. I always burned the crust, and it was going to be this whole relaxed, wonderful holiday where no one had an agenda. That was before my husband told me his mother had made other plans on my behalf. I didn't yell that night in the kitchen. I want to be clear about that, because what comes later might make it seem like I was building towards something, and I was. But not in the way people think when they assume anger looks like shouting. I was very calm. I told Caleb that this was not okay, that we needed to tell his mother it wasn't happening, that my parents were already planning to come, and that our house could not physically accommodate 20 people for a sit-down Christmas dinner. Caleb said he'd talk to her. I should have known what that meant. I'll talk to her in our marriage meant I will have a conversation that goes nowhere and then come back and ask you to compromise. And sure enough, 3 days later he came back and said his mum had already told everyone, and wouldn't it be easier to just make it work? And maybe my parents could drive back home after dinner instead of spending the night. And this is the part that still makes me close my eyes. Maybe I could scale up the recipe. Scale up the recipe. For 20 people. For a standing rib roast. I looked at my husband standing in our bedroom doorway asking me to cook a scaled-up Christmas dinner for 20 of his relatives who had been invited to my house without my knowledge, and I felt something settle in me. Not rage. Not even frustration. Something quieter and more permanent. Like a door closing, I said okay. He looked surprised. He probably should have been. Here's what I did not tell him, okay? Did not mean yes. Okay meant I had stopped arguing and started deciding. Over the next 2 weeks, I went about everything normally. I bought the groceries. I prepped the menu. My parents confirmed they'd arrive Christmas Eve and stay through the 26th. I hadn't said a word to them about any of this, partly because I didn't want to worry them, and partly because I didn't know yet exactly how this was going to go. My mother-in-law called twice to ask about parking and whether she should tell people to arrive at noon or 1, and I let Caleb handle both calls. I need you to understand something about those 2 weeks. I was not plotting revenge in some calculated way. I was trying to figure out what I actually wanted to do. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized I had one real choice. Go along with it or don't. There was no third option, where I talked it out and we reached a genuine resolution, because I had tried talking and I'd been handed a recipe scaling question in response. Christmas Eve, my parents arrived. My dad brought a bottle of wine he'd been saving. My mom brought 2 pies. We had dinner. Just the 4 of us, the dinner I had planned, easy and quiet and everything I'd wanted. My mother-in-law knew my parents were there, and I noticed she did not call to say hello, which told me everything I needed to know about how she felt about my side of the family. My parents went to bed around 10. Caleb and I sat in the living room and he asked if I was excited for tomorrow and I said, sure. Christmas morning I got up before anyone else. I went to the kitchen, made coffee and stood at the counter for a while just looking at the refrigerator. It was full. 2 days of careful grocery shopping. The rib roast, already prepped and trussed. The sides I'd planned for 6 people. The things my mum had brought, good cheese I'd bought as an appetizer, a bottle of champagne for Christmas morning, mimosas. I thought about what Caleb had said. Maybe you could scale up the recipe. I thought about Easter and the devil eggs and the cousins. I thought about Saturday mornings and the Trader Joe's texts. I thought about every time I'd been handed a situation and told it wasn't a big deal. Then I started packing. I want to be honest. I moved carefully and deliberately, not frantically. I wasn't angry in the way you imagine when you picture someone doing something like this. I was strangely calm. I got the big insulated cooler bags from the garage. I started moving things from the refrigerator to the bags, the roast, the prepped vegetables, the champagne, the cheese, my mom's pies, Everything that was mine, everything I had chosen and bought and prepared. I brought it all to my parents' room and knocked softly on the door. My mom opened it in her robe, hair undone, confused. I said, "Change of plans. We're doing Christmas at your hotel." She looked at the bags. She looked at me. She is a smart woman, my mother, and she did not ask a lot of questions. She said, "Give me 15 minutes." I went back to the kitchen. I left the basics. Condiments, some leftovers from last night, a carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread. I was not trying to leave them with nothing. I was trying to leave them with exactly what they'd have if I had never planned a Christmas dinner for 20 people who I had not invited and did not want in my home. Then I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "Merry Christmas. There's food in the fridge. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday." We were in my mother's car. I rode with them. Caleb's truck was in the driveway. By the time my mother-in-law's first car pulled up, I know this because my mom looked in the rearview mirror and said, "Is that them?" And I said, "Yep." And my dad, who had been completely silent the entire morning, said, very quietly, "Good girl." And that was the only time I came close to crying. My mom and I sat in her hotel room and had champagne at 11 in the morning and ate good cheese and watched a Christmas movie and ordered room service for actual lunch, which felt incredibly decadent and also just right. My dad took a nap. It was the best Christmas I had in years. My phone started going off around noon. Caleb first. Then a number I didn't recognize, which I later found out was his cousin's wife. Then my mother-in-law. I let all of them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to have that conversation in a hotel room in front of my parents, while It's a Wonderful Life was on TV. Caleb's messages started confused and ended angry and then came back around to confused. He couldn't find the rib roast. He didn't understand where the food had gone. He was asking if something had happened. Something had happened. It just hadn't happened to him in the way he thought. I called him back around 2. He answered on the first ring, and his first question was whether I was okay, which I appreciated, and his second question was where the food was, which I didn't. I told him I'd taken it. I told him Christmas at our house with 20 guests was never something I agreed to, and I wasn't going to cook a holiday dinner for people I hadn't invited. I told him my parents were with me and we were fine, and his mother could figure out the rest. There was a long silence. Then he said, "You could have just said something." I thought about every time I had said something, every conversation in the kitchen, every "I'll talk to her," every "it's not a big deal." I thought about Easter Sunday and the devil eggs and the cousins who didn't know they were unwelcome because no one had told them their hostess hadn't been asked. I said, "I did say something, Caleb, multiple times, and every time I did, you told me it wasn't a big deal." He didn't answer right away. I said, "I need you to understand that when you dismiss what I'm telling you, you're not keeping the peace. You're just moving the problem to me, and I'm done holding it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know." Those 2 words, quietly, without defense or excuse or counter-argument. I know. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in months, and it broke something open a little bit, something I hadn't known was still closed. We talked for almost an hour. Not about the food, or the dinner, or the 20 people standing in our kitchen, opening the refrigerator to find it half empty. We talked about us, about the pattern, about the fact that I had been raising the same concern in different forms for almost 2 years, and it kept getting smoothed over and handed back to me without resolution. He told me he hadn't seen it that way. I told him I believed that, and also that it needed to change. He told me he'd handle his mother. I told him I didn't want him to handle it. I wanted us to agree on what was acceptable in our own home and then enforce it together, as a team, not have him run interference while I waited at home, hoping this time would be different. He said, "That's fair." I stayed at the hotel that night with my parents. Christmas dinner was room service again, which was excellent, and my dad found a ball game on TV, and my mom and I did the crossword puzzle she always brings in her bag, and it was easy and warm and exactly what I had wanted the holiday to be. Caleb called once more that evening. He said his mother was upset. I said I understood that. He said some of the relatives hadn't been happy about arriving to an empty fridge. I said I was sure they hadn't been. He asked if I wanted to come home. I said I'd be home tomorrow. He said okay. I came home the day after Christmas. The house was clean. Caleb had cleaned up after everyone left, which I noticed and appreciated. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. He looked tired. He looked like someone who'd spent 2 days doing the thing he'd always avoided, which was being the one to deal with his family's expectations directly. He said, "It didn't go well." I said, "I know." He said his mother was angry. Some of the relatives were confused. His cousin's husband had made a comment about drama, which Caleb had apparently shut down, which surprised me. I said, "What did you say?" He said, "I said it wasn't drama, it was a consequence, and that we should have handled this weeks ago." I sat down across from him. I looked at my husband, tired, a little embarrassed, trying. And I thought about all the grace I had extended over 3 years and wondered if this was what it had been building toward. Not a punishment, not a victory. Just finally arriving at the conversation we should have had much earlier. We made some agreements that week. Real ones, specific enough that we could actually hold each other to them. His mother calls before coming over. Events at our house require my agreement, not just my notification. If she invites people on our behalf again, Caleb is the one who tells her no. Directly, not through implication or gentle redirection. She was cold to me for almost 2 months after Christmas. She didn't call, she didn't text, and when Caleb called her, she mostly complained about how things had gone and how embarrassing it had been, and how she had just been trying to bring the family together. I wasn't angry about the coldness. Honestly, the quiet was a relief. Around late February, she called me directly for the first time since December. She said she wanted to clear the air. She said she understood that she should have asked first. She didn't say sorry, not directly, but she said she understood, and I decided that was enough to work with. I don't love my mother-in-law. I don't think I ever will, not in the uncomplicated way she probably wants. But I respect that she loves her son, and I've made my peace with the fact that her version of love comes with sharp edges. What's changed is that I'm no longer the only one managing those edges. Caleb does more of that now. Not all of it, but more. And when I tell him something is a problem, he doesn't tell me it's not a big deal anymore. That's worth something. It took me emptying my own refrigerator on Christmas morning to get there. I wish it hadn't taken that. I wish we'd gotten there through conversation, through him hearing me earlier, through better communication before things hit a wall. But that's not the road we were on. We're on a different road now. I don't know exactly where it goes, but I'm not carrying everything alone anymore. And for right now, that's enough. I've thought about that Christmas morning a lot since it happened. Not with regret, I want to be clear about that, but with the particular kind of clarity you only get after you've finally done the thing you should have done much earlier. What I did wasn't dramatic, not really. I packed food I had bought with money I had earned for a holiday I had planned, and I left. That's it. The drama was always somewhere else. In the pattern of being told my concerns weren't a big deal, in the years of Saturday morning texts and refrigerator inspections and Easter ambushes, I just finally stopped absorbing it quietly. Here's what I understand now that I didn't fully see then. When you consistently accept treatment that diminishes you, you're not being gracious. You're teaching people what you'll tolerate. I taught my mother-in-law, through 3 years of breathing through it and smiling and scaling up recipes in my head, that there was no real cost to what she was doing. And I taught Caleb, without meaning to, that someone would always catch what fell through the cracks, and that someone was me. The hard truth about cause and effect in relationships is that it's rarely dramatic. It builds slowly. Every "it's not a big deal" that goes unchallenged is a small deposit into an account you don't know you're holding until the balance is due. I didn't empty that refrigerator out of anger. I emptied it because the account had closed. What I'm most proud of isn't the packing or the hotel or the room service champagne, honestly. It's the phone call, the hour-long conversation with Caleb where I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't make it about winning. I just said, plainly, that moving the problem to me wasn't the same as solving it. That took more strength than anything else I did that day. It's easy to act when you're done. It's hard to speak clearly when you still have something to lose. I think a lot about what my dad said in the car that morning, just 2 words, very quiet, and why it hit me the way it did. It wasn't because he was proud of the spectacle. It was because he'd watched me handle things gracefully for years, and he knew what it had cost me, and he was acknowledging that I had finally chosen myself without burning everything down to do it. That's the balance I think most people miss when they talk about setting limits. It's not about punishing anyone, it's about being honest about what you will and won't carry. My mother-in-law is not a villain. She's a woman who learned that pushing got her what she wanted, and no one had ever pushed back with any real consistency. That's a pattern, not a personality. Patterns can change when the conditions change. The conditions in our marriage changed on December 25th, and slowly, unevenly, things have shifted. I'm not carrying everything alone anymore. It took longer than it should have to get here. But I'm here, and that's what matters now.